chapter 11. Ooh. Called Belle Isle. A listing of Sarah Bernhardt's subsequent roles would be as laborious to write and as tedious to read as a timetable. There were revivals of old plays and productions of new ones. For successes were many, but she had her failures as well. Among the latter was a short drama of her own authorship entitled Les Aveux. It was quite lamentable and lasted 12 performances. Another failure, and deservedly so, was Lena, a trashy dramatization by Pierre Berton of a silly English novel called As in a Looking Glass. The final scene, a death one, naturally, was like something out of the Grand Guignol. The heroine, Lena, mistakenly believing that her husband no longer loves her, locks herself in a room and, in a pantomime lasting a good 5 minutes, goes about the melancholy business of committing suicide. For a time she toys with a dagger which just happens to be in a desk drawer. Then she decides upon a bottle of poison, which also happens to be handy, pours the contents into a glass, drinks it, and waits for the effects, sitting still and staring straight out at the audience. People who saw her claim that she seemed actually to turn green. Then, after a sudden convulsion, she falls forward headlong, her face hitting the floor, to all intents and purposes stone dead. She carried out this preposterous stunt with such realism that on opening night one spectator fainted while a well-known clubman was seen to bolt out to the nearest gutter and be actively ill. The critics were outraged by this great actress stooping to such rank melodrama, forgetting perhaps that only Sardou's skill disguised the fact that his plays too were pure melodrama. Jules Lemaitre, then only 36, but a man with a sensitive perception and fine mind, whose good opinion of Bernhardt valued, wondered if she was losing her ability to express normal everyday emotions, saying, "She seems to come into her splendid self only when she murders or when she dies." Her mail brought daily letters from admirers, begging her to return to the classics as being the only vehicles worthy of her artistry. And parents wrote the papers asking when Madame Bernhardt was going to appear in a play suitable for their daughters to attend. She didn't return to any classics, but she did appear in a play quite suitable for the most sheltered Joan Filet, the above-mentioned Jeanne d'Arc by Jules Barbier. After this pious gesture to placate her high-minded public, Sardou came forward with a new piece which was hardly of the caliber to please the parents of young girls. This was his dramatization of the Cleopatra story. Goncourt, who seems always to have cherished a grudge against Sardou, possibly because of the playwright's ability to make money, calls it fine history ruined by a music hall writer. Certainly Cleopatra had less merit than the other 3 dramas he had written to date for Sarah. However, it gave her the chance to wear elaborately exotic costumes. It also furnished her with some juicy moments for violent acting. She must especially have enjoyed herself in the scene in which a slave brought her the news of Anthony's marriage, whereat, in her jealousy and rage, she stabbed the unfortunate slave and then proceeded to make a wreck of the palace, smashing goblets, tearing down hangings, and creating as much havoc as the stage props permitted. The story goes of an elderly London dowager who, after witnessing this tempestuous display, remarked quite audibly to her companion, how very unlike the home life of our own dear queen." Cleopatra also gave Bernhardt a lovely long death scene in which she had a chance to writhe about as prettily as her asp. This was usually a live reptile, one of two garter snakes she kept in a jewel case on her dressing table. She was very fond of these wriggling pets, and during intermissions would take them out and playfully wrap them about her wrists, to the terror of her maid Dominga and any backstage caller. Again, she and Sardou worked jointly on the authenticity of sets, costumes, and even makeup. Mrs. Patrick Campbell, who became one of Sarah's close friends, asked her why, as Egypt's queen, she painted her palms a terracotta red, a detail hardly noticed across the footlights. I shall see it, Sarah explained. If I catch sight of my hand, it will be the hand of Cleopatra. In 1891, Sarah Bernhardt went on a 2-year tour, which took her halfway around the world and back again. The amount of cargo carried in the way of sets and theater equipment practically filled the hold of every ship the company sailed on and required a special freight train in every country they visited. Madame Sarah's own personal luggage consisted of 45 costume crates and some 75 trunks for her offstage dresses, coats, hats, furs, and her 250 pairs of shoes. There was a special trunk for her perfumes, cosmetics, and makeup, and a large chest for her table and bed linens, including the 5 pillows on which she slept. The itinerary for this tour is given at the end of the chapter. Travel was tough in those days, and work for every member of the company and stage crew was rigorous. The repertory was made up of some 15 productions, a few of them new ones, which Bernhardt, as always, directed. She was continually calling rehearsals to run through a new scene or brush up on an old one that was getting stale. The Broadway actor who balks at going on the road or complains to Equity about rehearsal overtime might pause to consider the stamina of these Gallic troopers. Through her many tours, Sarah Bernhardt was gradually coming to be known as the greatest of French ambassadors. She realized this, and she knew just how to carry off the ambassadorial act to perfection. If at some banquet or official reception held in her honor, some enthusiast shouted, Vive la France! She would rise, hold out her arms as though embracing everyone in the room, and in a voice clear and vibrant, reply, Vive whatever country she happened to be in, with such simple sincerity that the bonds between France and that nation were reaffirmed at least pro tem. Her 2-year tour was like a royal progress, with triumphs everywhere. News of her success was cabled to Paris from each country, and Jules Lemaitre wrote, Above any other person she will have known glory. Concrete, intoxicating, delirious, the glory of conquerors and of Caesars. In all countries of the world she has been given a reception never accorded to kings. She has had what princes of thought will never have. She also had what princes of thought will never have either, a neat profit of 3,500,000 francs. It was probably during this tour of a subsequent one afterwards that she suffered a second injury to her knee, and it was a decidedly severe one. At the finish of the last act of Tosca, when Floria leaps off the parapet Castello Sant'Angelo, the thick mattress that softened her fall was not in proper place, and Sarah landed on the bare boards of the stage. She was laid up during the day for several days. But managed to keep acting every night in spite of multiple bruises and a swollen right knee. In 1893, Sarah Bernhardt became fed up with being under any management other than her own. She dissolved her partnership with Raymond Deslandis, sold out her interest in the Port of St. Martin, and took over the Théâtre de la Renaissance at an outlay of 700,000 francs. She was the sole producer and director, and she ran it with the efficiency of a field marshal and the lavishness of a Croesus. Croesus. Capital Croesus. Her productions were sumptuous, often overly so, and her own theater wardrobe is said to have rivaled that of Queen Elizabeth I, of course. All the secondary and costuming was done under her personal supervision, mostly in the workrooms she had installed. She was in the theater 14 hours a day, sometimes longer, consulting with designers, overseeing technical effects, rehearsing new plays, brushing up on old ones. It is said that she was a brilliant director, not only when it came to getting what she wanted from individual players, but in handling the movements and groupings of crowds, for many of her shows required large casts with lots of extras, who came a centime a dozen in those less costly days. When she got hungry, she'd knock off work for what she called a déjeuner sur l'herbe, the déjeuner being a picnic luncheon of cold meats, salad, cheese, and wine, and the herbe, oh, le herbe, okay, and the herbe being the floor of her dressing room where she and whomever she chose to invite sat sprawled on a large green carpet. After an hour of this pastoral repast, they'd get back to work. With all this, she would manage to appear herself in 8 performances a week. Often she'd call a late rehearsal to restage a scene or break in a replacement, going on until the small hours of the morning. Then, seeing her company drooping with exhaustion, she'd cry out, "My poor children, you're tired. Go off to bed and we'll work again in the morning." And next day she'd show up fresher than the youngest of them. When the actor Dorival commented on her most terrifying vitality, she shrugged and said simply, "C'est mon métier." In addition to this tireless backstage activity, she never neglected the front of the house. She went over every item on the box office statements, saw to it that the audience accommodations were comfortable, and, God bless her, she was the first theater manager to enforce the regulation that ladies attending matinees must remove their hats. It is more than can be said for the present day managements.